Carol, you can come on in. My earliest recollections of learning how to bead were with my mother. I was probably 5. If you got a hole in your shirt, or if you had towels in the bathroom that had any spots, they were embroidered, crocheted, or beaded. Beads are purveyors of light. Translucency is always my quest. Also trying to make beads do things that people say they don't easily do, or that people believe they don't have the skill and prowess to do. Of course, I believe that. My influences are generally cultural. For me, it's important to imbue the work with something that will resonate and follow somebody home. Whether it's beauty and they just want to luxuriate in that, or it's just the message. Because I think art has the ability, if not cure or heal, at least enlighten. Slap you in the head, wake you up. My first library that I went to was built in the 50s, remember, Harold?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been going there since I was in elementary school, and my mother and I exhibited there. I've lectured there.
Wow.
I'm a community girl.
When I first met Joyce, I saw her in a festival on Johns Hopkins campus. And I began to talk to her because I thought her work was so compelling. A few months later, my husband and I were sitting out on the front step, and he looks up and says, "Joyce!" And I said, "You know her?" And he said, "Yeah, I was in school with her." Well, from then on, we became best friends, and we were like glue, and it's been over, oh my God, 35, 40 years.
Why am I so much in love with Baltimore? Because of us having a long history of African Americans living here. Part of it is like, I think we ought to stay where the fight is. And Baltimore is a highly challenged city. I know that art can be a tool that changes people's lives. It's helped to change mine. I have a very classic African American background. My parents picked cotton and tobacco in the South. They wanted to leave the South and have a better life, and they treasured education that they didn't have. It manifested itself in me. They also talked about the world in which they lived and their lack of power to change it. So my work is about the political and social institutions and the trials that we're experiencing in life. The font from where all of this stuff flows is my mother, Elizabeth Caldwell Talford Scott. She was someone who picked cotton. She was a very, very hard worker, but she always had this creative impulse.
Joyce J. Scott and her mother, Elizabeth Talford Scott, are the prima donnas of African American cultural life here in Baltimore. This quilt is by Elizabeth Talford Scott, and it's called Joyce's Quilt. Her mother created the quilt so that Joyce could learn important lessons in life. And as you'll see behind me, there's a fish right in the center, and that fish is eating the North Star. So it's really about things that have to do with navigation, how we move through life, and the fact that even if we're as bright as the North Star, something can even come and eat us. So there's also a rabbit with a shovel tail. And what Joyce says that's about is that if you dig yourself into a hole, you can get yourself out of a hole.
This is what my mother told me about how they were taught to quilt. And all the ladies would be sitting around, and what they'd do is the kids would go under the quilt like a tent. And sometimes they'd have to send the needles back up, but they get to hear all those stories under this magical quilted tent. Eventually they were able to come up and sit next to someone and quilt. So this is a quilt that's, using family fabric. And they're bits and pieces like that. It's a very, very old piece of fabric that she carried with her when she would go from place to place. And then eventually when she had me, had no time to quilt, started to quilt again. But she took 50 years to complete this quilt. Now this quilt represents to me what many, many quilts are. I call them diaries for pre-literate people. Because how do people write down family history many times when you don't have the ability to read or write very well? Each one of those stitches is a word, and they become sentences and paragraphs talking about the family history. And when you go back, you read a quilt. So when I started destroying one of my mother's quilts, she said to me, if you love it, you ought to write on it, meaning stitching. So crafts are epicentral to what I do because I'm listening to my mom tell me those stories. And they're not just stories that talk about my family history, but they're primers on how to start making artwork that matters.